Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Hello, LinkedIn land. It's Toby, and Emily back. Is that our combined name?
Yeah, I
Toby.
think that's us combined into one person. Hello,
Hey,
everybody.
Toby. It's Toby here. Like all the other, I don't know. I'm trying to think of celebrities that have
Jedward.
that.
Jedward.
Jedward is your most recent reference point.
No,
I'm
I
like,
didn't
what do
say
you?
recent. Most well known
No,
of
but like
the portmanteau is the word you're looking for.
portmanteau, like because Taylor Swift often gets portmanteaued with like whoever she's going out with, and who else? Like
The
the
Super
the
Bowl
Card the
party.
Kardashians, I think maybe get that. Anyway, we have already ventured into territory neither of us are comfortable with. But hello, Emily. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. Busy, busy, busy. But would complain if I wasn't busy. So I guess overall it's a good thing. But yeah, feels like it's always this quarter, isn't it? I'm sure everybody can relate. Everybody wants to spend their budgets. It's a use it or lose it situation. So everyone's like, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And you're like, yes, you want that all done in 6 weeks. Okay, let's see what we can do.
And then we'll just all go on holiday in the summer, and the world turns another
Rotation?
rotation, and it all starts all over again. So we put it out there last week. We asked, did anyone want to talk about data advocacy and AI? And we had one vote for the data and one vote for advocacy, and we've opted for data because it was our good friend, and the reason you and I even know each other in the first place is because of Will Proctor, the other half of the company Procter and Gamble. I thought of this joke earlier and I didn't really write it. I haven't written it properly. Like, if Will Proctor and Ed Gamble started a company, Ed Gamble being a stand-up comedian, they could call it Procter and Gamble. Then I was trying to think, what would they
Well,
do?
they
What
call it Gamble and Procter, surely, because I feel like Procter and Gamble is probably already.
you think? No, it's fine. Like, oh, Marcia's here. Hey, Marcia, how are you doing?
She's tuned into this inane Toby reverting to his former, I'm not exactly going to call it career, hobby as a stand-up comedian.
Oh yeah, definitely hobby. Like, it definitely wasn't a career. Otherwise, I would not be here. I would be in bed probably, because stand-up comedians work notoriously late and probably aren't up at this time. Sweeping statement, I know. So we've gone with data this time, and we're going to talk about HR's data problem. Why we're all measuring the wrong things. We briefly touched on this, I think last time, or maybe 2 eps ago, when I talked about Westworld and how, like, the season 1 or 2 crescendo of Westworld, there was them about all the robots in that theme park evaluating human behavior through natural interaction with those robots. A bit Big Brothery. But for my money, HR sits on the other end of the scale and doesn't look at human behavior over and above kind of what the several platforms it may have tells them they should be looking at, which only validates their own existence. What do you think, Emily?
I think that so often HR teams fall into a number of categories. I think if we're going broad brushstrokes, because obviously all people are different, you have the people who are slightly allergic, is the word in my head, allergic to data, scared of data, don't really know what to do with it. Maybe they do a few things, but it's very, if we're talking about a maturity model, say, it's very much at the base level of it. Very, I can't think of the word, nascent, I think is the word that they use, but whatever, beginners, shall we say. I also think that you then have the people who are like, oh, we need data, we need data, we need data, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. And then they have so much data, but they can't really make any sense of it. So they have too much coming through, or they don't know what the priorities are, or perhaps then they tend to measure, quote unquote, the wrong things, maybe, or maybe not the most useful things for them rather than the wrong things. Because sometimes you can be measuring things that are useful, but they're not as useful as perhaps others, or a slight twist on them might make them more useful. For example, let's say engagement surveys, because we talk about this one a lot, right? It's quite a key one. You might be measuring how engaged your people are, but are you necessarily measuring how productive they are? Because engagement doesn't exactly, it correlates to productivity. It's not the only reason, so it's not the only causation of productivity, right? There are lots of other things, like, I don't know, having systems that enable you to do your job, for example, shall we say. People turning up for meetings. Sorry, that's something that happened earlier. I'm not over yet. And then I think the third team, you can very much have, there are some people who are really hot on this, I think, who are really hot on data, the question then becomes how much are you communicating that out of what you're doing and communicating that to like your CEO, your C-suite, your core business team, and demonstrating how valuable HR is. I think there are some people who do that well, and obviously there are some big businesses with huge, big people analytics functions, some of which do it well, some of which don't do it well. But that's, I think, the third type of HR team, I would say.
So we've got a few more people joining us. So hello, everybody. Just drop us a little note in chat to let us know you're alive and well and you tuned in all that good stuff. And while we wait for those people to say hello to us, let's start with. I like the word allergic because we have definitely, both at Freeformers and individually worked with those clients, stakeholders, and internally in organizations where it's. If you're not comfortable with something, you tend to just stay away from it, right? Because it's the easiest thing to do. And because, as we look at HR maturity levels, developing into people teams and then into employee experience teams, that there is this element of growth and change that has to happen there. But ultimately, if you kind of just stay still and keep on using the same measurement models and frameworks, then are you really changing? Regardless of, the output, because I think this is the probably the biggest frustration is that there's a lot of conversation about changing the output of what HR and people teams do, but not really like the measurement of it. And it's like, well, why would you even move again? Why would you move and start doing new things if you don't know if it's having an impact? And because you operate from this place of heart where it's like, oh, well, we're people and we want our people to have like the best experience possible because it makes them more engaged, more productive, etc. And you're like, but that isn't the reason. The reason is because you've got to have these performance goals that need to be met, XYZ. You mentioned it last time. Isn't just money, but there's about achievement against a strategy there as well. So to shy away from it, I understand it. I understand why you shy away from it, but what I can't comprehend is why you wouldn't. And I don't know whether this is an individual thing or as a team thing, like why you would just bury your head in the sand. And I think there are people that we've worked with that have hired and have people analytics teams, but either they are so new to the world of HR and people teams that they don't really know why they're there and what they're doing, or they are trying to enact a strategy that actually doesn't exist because the leadership of that team is completely unaware of what a data strategy is and kind of go, well, I hired an analyst. Maybe they'll just give me a strategy. They won't, is the answer. If you think an analyst is going to come in and design your data strategy for your HR team, you are very much mistaken.
Especially when it's a junior analyst who's very much does what they're told type thing.
Yeah, like even some senior analysts that I've worked with, that like it is just not the way they turn up to work, or the expectation hasn't been set that that's the way they turn up to work. It's like someone wants a report, I pull together the report, I email it back to all the stakeholders, like, and that alone, I think any accountant will tell you, or anyone in the finance team, that alone can take up a fair chunk of old time to just go through that process, right? But no one then interrogates whether that reporting is right or not.
Well, I think you've hit on a very important point there, or sort of meandered around a very important point there, is that finding the data translator is really hard, especially to find it within the person who can not only analyze the data, tell the story, which is a translator role, but then also, have the business mind and the strategic thinking going forward. That's a very rare combination. I know very few people who can do that. There obviously are some fantastic people, but there's not that many of them out there. Um, ages ago, like 2015, I was so 10 years ago now, I was part of a team. It was a Europe, so pre-Brexit days. Oh, look, we've got to Brexit again. It was part of a EU consortium project looking into, it was called European Data Science Academy. It was looking into developing a European Data Science Academy, a lot of courses of which were run through universities, some private institutions like the ODI where I worked, the Open Data Institute. Anyway, what we found basically back then, and it hasn't really changed as far as I can tell, is that data people have data skills and business people, I'm not even on screen, business people have business skills and never the twain shall meet. And that was just a crying demand, that finding that mix, that person who has those data skills and those business skills, was just impossible to find. But I do think there's also something there about the expectation of the role. It's a well documented phenomenon that people grow into expectations, right? If you, and well, perhaps the opposite is what's really true, is that if your expectations are stunted, people will are very unlikely to exceed those expectations, right? It's been proved time and time again. I have millions of irrelevant stories in my head, which I'm not going to talk about now. It's a thing. And so I do wonder perhaps if it's partly permission and it's partly expectation that actually helping people and support, of course, like you said, you can't just expect your data analyst to write your data strategy for them. It's giving them the tools, the skills, the conditions, including the headspace, to be able to be more strategic with data and to bring those points together. And I think some of that comes from HR and an expectation of what HR is. And obviously, whenever you're in a culture, like you have your work to do, and normally you have too much work that's not going to fit in anyway to your time. So of course you don't do the things that are hard and that are extra. Um, but I also think some of it comes from business, and I think it comes from this very typical thing that we've talked about before with how HR has traditionally been seen just as administrative.
Mm.
And I think that that kind of legacy feeling just still pervades and is one reason why we're not as data centric as we could be.
I want to go back to the point you talked about, like the two ends of the. No, it's not necessarily two ends, but like these two different types of individuals, and I reflect on us, our relationship, and what we're doing is that actually everything you've described, like there is one of us over here and one of us over here, and without the other, it wouldn't work. Like the model that we've created just simply wouldn't exist today if I tried to do it myself, wouldn't work. If you tried to do it yourself, wouldn't have worked. So
Tobally, just to come back to the very first word of this, or first
the
sentence, we need Tobally.
the Tobly model, and of course, because of my ego, apparently Toby has to be first. No, it's because I was introducing myself. Anyway, if you want to understand any of that context, go back to the beginning. If you've got to here, you've probably heard the beginning bit. But so there is this element, right? So there are these, but there are those two individuals. But then I like to think, patting myself on the back, that I have a goodish grasp of data and data strategy. I also like to think that you have a great kind of understanding of business. I obviously, each of us are better in our own domains than the other. That I think that's fair to say. But at least we can meet in the middle and have a very, very good conversation about how we measure stuff. And I think the output of our conversations is when I talk to people, everyone's just like, "Oh, that just makes sense." It's like, yeah, but no one's got here to this place that we've got to yet. And for the life of me, still can't understand why. But I think it's taken time, right? So we've had to work together for 18 months now, and it's only really at the beginning of this year we're going to kind of go, okay, click. We've kind of got this now. We know what the measurement model for HR or people teams looks like, and it's vastly different to what it looks like now, which is worrying because that's a huge amount of systemic change you've got to do for the industry. And I think a point you mentioned in the green room before we jumped into here was, where does that inspiration come from to start doing things differently in inadvertent commas people analytics?
Well, I think you're overlooking a couple of big advantages that we have coming from a place of privilege, is that, towards the beginning, we weren't fully rammed. We're not PAYE with the whole thing set up and jumping in and having to do 15 million things immediately. We did have some time. And obviously we weren't being paid the nice salaries that go with a job like that. So there's an element of that and the time and the thinking about it. But also when you're two people, you can move and you can adapt so much quicker than you can in a big business. I mean, of course we can. That's why we do it, right? So I don't think really we can use us as a blueprint for a whole team. Certainly not not in terms of the speed of change, right? People don't change because it's difficult.
But this is what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that we're overly unique, but there's that opportunity that we figured something out and this is what we want to do, is empower the industry. Marcia, for example, who works with us, empower people to use a better methodology going forward, because if you don't, you will just get left behind. Well, that's my belief anyway, is that you will get left behind. You will not be able to prove that you are valid within the organization, and therefore you'll just become extinct. There was a deep, sharp intake of breath there.
Yeah, I was going to say, even more so with AI and automation coming up, and if your worth is stuff, or you can do things that can be generated by a very intelligent, are we talking like domain specific AI now? I'm not talking like the general ones. I'm talking like something that's been trained very specifically in a specific field. Are you more likely to become redundant? I mean, yes, more likely, definitely. Are you going to? I mean, who knows at this stage? You asked a question about who, though. Who should drive this? I think it needs to come. It needs to come from the top of people, but the top of people has to be on the same level as the top of business. Like maybe not your CEO, but your C-suite that sits under your CEO.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a very forward-thinking CHRO, right, or whatever, whatever the official title is, I don't necessarily think that an HRD is enough unless they have the. No, actually, it doesn't really matter about titles. Forget I said that. I think it comes down to the person who has enough space and time to be strategic, and then instilling that in their team, hiring against those responsibilities. So including data in your expectations of what your team does. And that's a very hard thing to change and to do.
Quite. Like, I have tried it with numerous teams I've worked with, right from O2 to some of the clients I had at previous organizations I've worked at, is that it is so easy for me to go into a company and write it down. It is way, way harder to help them enact it. Well, and this is the other half of what we've been doing, right? Is that we figured out a way to enact it as well. Like, it isn't like, oh, here's a measurement framework, everyone adopt it. It's like, no, this is tricky stuff that you've got to go on a journey to do. You can't just switch it on. If you could, everyone would be doing it. So whilst like we kind of went us about face doing it, right? In that we got the end state pretty swiftly. It was like, that was the easy bit. The hardest bit is how do you get to that end state and go on that journey. I like I say, I look back on some of my own consulting work and what I went in and went, hey, you should go in and do this. And it was so easy for me to just go in and say that because there was literally zero consequence of me saying you should go and do this, because I was never going to be the one who had to go in and navigate all the internal politics. The thing I would say is that when I look at my time at O2, especially, quite a forward-thinking learning leadership team had some quite, at that moment in time, new ways of measuring the impact of that department, but was prohibited by the effectiveness of the broader HR team. So therefore, regardless of how innovative that leader was, they were kind of disabled not to be able to kind of build in this really cool data methodology because it wasn't function wide, and therefore it kind of stops there. It's what we talked a little bit about human-centered design. You can't design human-centered design on an island, and your data strategy can't be designed on an island. And I think if you look at the data ecosystem work that you do, all we see in HR are islands of data and technology that create a rubbish employee experience, but also make it nigh on impossible
to do anything.
Yeah, like
to
you
do
don't know
anything to
anything's any
get the
good.
data, you end up with two conflicting data sources or more. You don't know which is a single source of truth because you don't have a single source of truth. It's really, really clunky, really manual. None of your systems talk to each other, and we see this time and time again. And I would extrapolate that. It's not just HR. The whole businesses seem to be set up in a way. I'm not going to solve this now, and it's a big organizational development question, but businesses seem to be set up in a way and they have their own targets in different departments or different teams and priorities, and all of it is completing and conflicting, and the systems never talk to each other.
Rubbish, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm not proposing we fix that. That is too big for right now.
Yeah, we can't fix all of business. We can just fix the function that we have most experience in HR and learning, right? And here we go, unplugged.
Okay.
Like
myself.
What really pisses me off, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, is that any HR or learning technology that I've worked with, procured, managed in the past, the data I get out of that only validates its own existence. And I know I sound like a broken record because I say that all the time, but literally the only the only thing a platform needs to do once it's inside an organization is prove enough data and storytelling to prove that it should remain in that organization. That's okay if you're the one selling the bloody technology. But if you're on the receiving end of that, either the HR team that's on the receiving end of it or the employee, both of those things don't work for you. So all of a sudden now we're designing technologies for organizations that benefit the people who create the technology rather than the other people, like the end user or the end manager of that technology, which seemed absolutely baffling, but it
Let's just give an
happens.
example. So comms. Comms platforms we looked at, like ways of communicate.
We need to do we're going to do a whole live stream on
No,
comms
no, okay,
because
but talk about, so like last year when we were talking to a few different providers about things, I'm not going to name names. Do you remember the one we looked at where it was all fancy and pretty, but there was no data? Would you like to
yes,
talk about that one now?
yeah. Well, I'll talk more generally because I will slip up. But like, I had a
Okay.
conversation with someone in an internal comms role, and they were talking about emails. Like, oh, I'm writing this email. I'm going to send this email out to the whole organization. Yada 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 yada.
You said this word for word last week, just
Did
to say.
I?
You did.
But it still winds me up. Like,
You
there's
might
no
finish in case
tracking.
anyone wasn't here last week.
Yeah. So essentially, that individual had no way of tracking click-through rate, open rate, dwell time on the email or anything. And I'm like sat there as someone who's used marketing tools before going, how do you not know this? And how, like, are you not using this technology from 10 years ago to at least have an indicator of how your content is performing? It really disappointed me. But I think that goes, into these other platforms that we talk about, like internal comms platforms themselves. Even at that level, they still don't give robust metrics over and above. Kind of go, how many people logged in? How many times did they log in? How long were they logged in for? And you're like, Greg, who was in our comments a couple of eps ago, put a really good. I think I was listening to his podcast, and he talked about Monzo. Right? He says he loves Monzo. Monzo, he absolutely loves, and it does everything he needs to do for his personal account and his business account. And big up to Monzo because I'm a personal and business customer of Monzo. Freeformers Unplugged, brought to you by Monzo.
You wish we were
I
brought
know,
by
right?
Monzo.
Just like if you just look for Freeformers on your accounts, just drop a couple of grand in there. It's fine for the mention. But what he said was like he spends very little time in that application, but derives a huge amount of value from it. So all of a sudden, the metrics that I've just talked about, that piece of technology was saying is like
Yeah.
login times. How many times did you log in? How long were you in there for? Doesn't matter. Doesn't like it matters a little bit, but it's not like that's not the be all and end all. But those three metrics
Yeah.
are the thing that vendor will use to kind of go, hey, loads of people logged in. They log in frequently and they're there for a really good long time. So therefore, you should recontract us for another 3 years. Right? That's
Yes.
kind of where we're at. Is that the
Yes.
story? Am I talking about the right story?
Yes, I think so. I've just got distracted thinking about how much we, or I, on behalf of us, use Monzo data as well. Like we use Monzo data for everything. All of our
Ah,
like
but
cash
here's the
flow
interesting thing.
forecasting, all of that.
We use more of the Monzo data than the actual application itself. So actually we should be Monzo must be tracking how often are we pulling information from one platform to another? Because we use Zero more than
Yeah,
we use
there's a
Monzo.
well, I'm also just thinking about other integrations into yeah, we're a small business, okay. It goes through to a spreadsheet. Some of it is integrations into spreadsheets and things. I mean they will track how many integrations you have, but I don't know. I don't know that I'm not an expert on Monzo integrations. I don't know how they can track it. I think we've wandered off point slightly.
We have wandered off point slightly, but like we're having a more nuanced conversation now about how a platform performs for its end users, way more than I have ever had with any internal HR or learning team. Like, and again, preface it with like, I'm not saying it's easy because I've been there and had to have those difficult political conversations and have been told outright, no, either you can't have this data because you are in the learning team, so you don't need it. It's kind of bullshit. Or actually going to a vendor and saying, hey, can your platform provide me this data? Is like, no, our platform doesn't do that because it's not a feature set that they ultimately have defined that they need.
Or their users need because their users don't necessarily know to ask for it, or even if they are asking for it, they've just decided they don't care and that it's not, yeah, like you said, a core set.
And the crazy thing is, just that I slightly wander off topic again, but this is the nature of Freeformers Unplugged, is that when we look at, here's a good one. I pat myself on the back before I even make a statement. I really need to check my ego. I have spoken to 4 different companies that deliver 4 different things to employees on behalf of HR teams. Each of them are kind of going, how do we build in social functionality into our product? So I had an employee benefits company, an internal comms company, a learning company, and a HRIS. All of them want to put social functionality in their platform.
And so just clarify, social functionality, you mean like what, comments and chats and things?
Comments, chats, user-generated content, because that's going to be the thing that inspires. Again, designing from a point where we want to get people in the platform and spend as much time in the platform as possible. So that's what we do. We put that in. And you're like, doesn't really make so much sense to the end user if they've got these 4 platforms all with a social functionality, especially when you've probably got a Slack, a Microsoft Teams where they can already talk to each other anyway. Like, it absolutely flipping baffles me. There we go. I checked my language this time. That you would think that social functionality in a HR platform is going to be the thing that changes the game, is going to be the thing that loosens up the conversation, creates more user-generated content. Like, it's about the human. It's not about the technology. We've bashed our heads against the wall with this several times. But let's get back to the topic in hand.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even start? Because you mentioned kind of user type 1, like the allergic, and then there was, what was the second?
We've got too much data. We don't really know how to handle it or what to do with it or how to prioritize.
Which I think is archetypal of the situation we just talked about. We've got like 7, 10, 20, 30 platforms. All of them have data, and we're not telling stories with these all in one place. And then what was the third one?
The third one was broadly people who are doing lots of data, telling stories, but I think they're split into kind of a sub 2 types: the people who can communicate that really well to the rest of the business, and have the recognition that goes alongside it, and then the people who can't do that and are somewhat ignored.
And in the nicest possible way. So we're writing a white paper at the moment looking at the gaming industry and how their employee experience performs. Again, individually, we could not write that white paper because I looked at the data, I passed the data over to you, you visualize the data in an incredible way, and then I came back with more questions like, oh, would we do this and would we do that? And you're like, oh, okay, we're going to tweak this, and it's probably gone through 2 or 3 cycles already of this analysis of storytelling to go, what is the story? Where we will get there because there is a story, but it's taken time to figure that out. I suppose the benefit, right, is that we're doing that, every month or whatever, and building this cycle of, looking at data, evaluating, and spitting out a story at the other end. Fortunately, really, you only need to do it once for a H. Like, you have to, and it's a much bigger project because what I'm looking at is 1, 2, 3, 4 data sources and pulling those together to tell a story. So you've kind of got to go through that pain of bringing everything together. What do I have? Also, what don't I have, and what do I need from so if we look at some of the clients we've worked with, like, there are clear gaps. Like, how do you measure this? It's like, oh, we don't, and they have no way of capturing it. It's like, okay, you need to create a way of capturing that because it's really important information.
I think you just said your questions in the wrong order.
Okay.
The what do I need, I think, is fair. Like, what am I trying to achieve? Now, you have stories that you say over and over again. This is, I think, my mantra. What is the outcome? What are you trying to do? I feel like I say this every week. I feel like I say this multiple times a week, multiple times a day.
You say it multiple times to me specifically.
Yes, okay. And other people. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Oh, I've got hair now. Yeah. What are you trying to achieve with data? Like, what do you want? What do you want to do? What do you want to measure? What's strategically important for you? And hopefully for most people that should be really obvious, because you should have a business strategy. And I don't think you should have a data strategy that's separate. And I was looking at writing our data strategy, and then I came to the conclusion, I was like, I don't want to write a data strategy. I want to make sure that data is embedded across our business strategy, because that's how important it is. That it is a section that, or not even a section, a series of sections that sit under our business strategy. And I think everybody should be doing it like that. The problem comes back to that separation of skills, like I said before. So yeah, what are you trying to achieve? breaking that down. So in a business, you've obviously got your overall mission, and then you've got your key priority areas. Maybe you've got your strategic objectives, OKRs, objective and key results, whatever you want to call them. Within those, that is where you should be measuring things and saying, this is what I want to measure because that is my key result. And then from there, that's when you say, what have I got and where are the gaps?
And well, I'll come back to that because I'm going to talk about archetypal HR metrics. So when I immediately forget, let's come back to that. But Ron has come up with a quite cool question. Is too much better than too little? And I'm assuming in reference to data here.
Yeah. Well, I assume so.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Food.
So, yeah.
Is too much better than too little? Yes, I think so. However, yeah, I'll tell you why. Yes, because you can then take the process that I just spoke about in terms of figuring out what you're trying to achieve and then pulling in the bits that are relevant and then ignoring the bits that aren't relevant or that you want to come to later. It means you have to be able to prioritize, and prioritizing against your business objectives is the best way to do it. Too little, you just got the gaps and you just don't know. So overall, yes, too much is too little, but it can be incredibly overwhelming, and strategic prioritization is just so important.
And now we've got a conversation going in chat about like the data. To your point, right, is the data has to add value. CJ's kind of come in saying pointless data is distracting. Here's one for you. If you're don't you have to capture the data initially to know that it's pointless? To kind of go, oh, we're capturing this data and it's telling us nothing. Like if you kind of go, oh, that if we capture that data, it's probably not going to tell us nothing. Do you need to validate that it's not going to prove anything first?
There's different types of like data analysis and things that you're talking about here. I think you're kind of crossing your wires slightly. If you want to describe what's happening, that's not pointless, and you know what you want to describe. You have a hypothesis, essentially. You have an hypothesis. I think that X is what's happening. I think that, and then you're looking for data to prove or disprove your hypothesis, okay? So that's a descriptive data. You're also, I think, confusing it with the data that you've been doing recently, which is where you're looking to find a story which may or may not be there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more of an exploratory analysis rather than because you're looking to make a point. If you just want to say this is what's happening, then that's straightforward. And if you're looking for a story that may or may not be there or something that proves a point, that's when you have to do a little bit more of an exploratory analysis first. And then there's also predictive analysis, right? So what's coming in the future or what you think will be coming in the future. And they're only as good as the models that you have in place. But those are what I think make a key difference. And we've not really talked about this. So there's your lagging and leading indicators that we talk about a lot. So lagging indicators meaning things that have already happened, and you're looking for a description to say, okay, X number of people left in this time period. Predictive or a leading analytic is how many people are going to leave in the next 3 months, 1 year, based on historical data, yes, and our predictive modeling.
It's interesting. Marcy has come in. Like, I think you need to know what you're hoping to get from the data. And
yes, Marcy,
I don't think that's focused on enough at the start. And I think I'm just going to go back to a project I ran a couple of years ago that we're looking at the performance of this organization's graduate program. And I was stupid at this point because I went to
I love this one. Sorry, everybody. That's why I'm laughing. I've heard all these stories before.
Here's 100 lines of data that you could go after. Let's get these 100 lines of data and figure out which is the important data. And there was paralysis by kind of like navigating the political landscape to even go and get these 100 lines of data, because they're not all going to come from one person or two people or two teams. So that didn't happen. So then I did what Marcy said, right? Is that I went, okay, let me disregard all of this. What we're going to assume at this point is pointless data, is not going to help us tell a story. What 3 points can we get that we think will tell us a story? And I went, get this bit of data, get this bit of data, and this bit of data. If you can just do these 3 for me, we can go away and get them. They still didn't go away and get those, even just the 3 bits of data, which was super annoying. But they did try, but they were met with, oh, well, we don't think you need this data in your team. And so, but that comes to the point where it's like, well, you kind of need to drop me into that conversation because I can tell them why they need to have that data to prove this thing. And this was their analyst was saying, I don't see how this data is pertinent to what you're trying to achieve. And you're like, it was a very straightforward conversation, but I hadn't enabled my direct stakeholder. Again, this is years ago. This isn't like last week because I've matured and changed. I've changed.
You got older.
I definitely got older. I definitely got grey going on now, which I didn't back then. But this ability to kind of simplify and bring that hypothesis to life in a way that gets you the data you need to at least have a look at it. And that's essentially what we've done in the all of Freeformers, right? Is we had this hypothesis. What data could we get that might help us validate that? And it's taken us on this crazy journey of like benchmarking company and all this kind of stuff, which at the very beginning we never thought we'd get to. We've had to go on this journey of this voyage of exploration to figure this stuff out. But to your point, right at the top of the live stream, that has taken time and space for us to get there. So what are we saying? Don't bother? It's too difficult? Or what?
Just because something's difficult, does that mean it's not worthwhile doing? No.
Yeah, probably.
It's not.
No.
No. In fact, the most worthwhile things are often the hardest to do, I think. So what are we saying? Well, every context is different. Every business is different. But I think if you're in a place of leadership, getting people to be using data to make decisions is a good start. The questions like, what is the evidence for that? What are we basing this decision on? If you get that in everybody doing it, I'm just reminded now of like posters around the workplace. Not that, I mean, we're on a lot of places are hybrid at the moment, but hey, like I worked somewhere where they had behaviors they wanted to instill, so they just printed posters and was like, that's it. Ask some questions. It's like, okay,
was this the same company? Was this the company that had speed as a habit?
Yeah, it was. But they had like they wanted you to. So in meetings, in all the meeting rooms, they had posters saying, you might have come across this, like by exactly who. So when you're deciding actions, by exactly who, when is exactly going to be done. Whatever. I really messed up that storytelling, shall we say. Anyway, my point is, however you're going to get those behaviors across to people, whether it's printed posters, which I don't recommend, or whatever, like getting people to be like, where is the evidence for this? And asking themselves that and having that sort of not taking things literally, just kind of having that kind of critical understanding, which I think, by the way, we've lost as a society. Because you can cherry pick whatever information you want and say this proves my point, but obviously within a business you're looking at more objective points. So I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but what I'm trying to say is having that critical thinking and where is the evidence. I think that is a good way to start helping people to be more data savvy and recognizing that makes you a data person, right? If you're using information of any sort to support your claims or to make decisions on, then you are a data person. And helping people to realize that you don't have to have a PhD in data science or whatever. You don't have to be able to be thousands of lines of code and everything to be a data person. I think that's just really important.
Interesting. I will go back to a story which you may say I've told again, but regardless, any induction or onboarding program that I've worked on, one of the performance outcomes has been, we're going to impact attrition.
Yeah.
And I sit there with not my jaw on the floor because they're paying clients, again, previous organization, but like, are you kidding me? Do you have speed as a habit because your brain isn't working properly? I quite like that joke. Sorry.
It's fine. I'm still just aghast that was
speed as a habit just on so many levels just doesn't work.
Oh,
but like, to say that you think like a one-day workshop or a webinar or whatever you're delivering on this on people's first day is going to have an impact on attrition, that's a pretty far-reaching like assumption. And I go back to Marcia's point, right? It's like, well, what are you hoping to get out of this, and what data can you bring into that conversation? Because all you're doing there is you're clutching at straws, kind of going, oh, maybe if we deliver really good induction or an onboarding experience, maybe it'll impact attrition.
I mean,
Maybe it will in the first 6 to 12 months, but it's not
was
going to impact this broader attrition metric. That'd be
was that
ridiculous.
their only metric of success? Surely
Uh,
not.
for me,
It's the only one you remember.
well, no, it's all right, not that old. For me, it was the only actual measurable one.
Okay.
Because one of them was speed to competency, and you're like, God, then tell me how you're going to measure that, because I'd love to see it. But they didn't. One of them was also advocacy. So, what was the net promoter score of it? And I was like, well, that's quite measurable. But anyone who leaves any training session always kind of puts something really good. So, it's like, how much spacing you're going to give between the session and asking them how actually useful it was. Because a lot of the content in a lot of the induction onboarding things focus on the first 3 months. So don't ask them at the end of the first day how useful it was. Ask them at the end of 3 months how useful it was. And they'll probably tell you, I forgot I even went on it because there was so much stuff that happened in between that either worked or didn't work. And then that's where all the juice is like, get all that insight. And like, they will literally tell you in the past 3 months what's been tricky. And lo and behold, what happened on their first day paid into complete insignificance in the journey that they would have gone on.
Unless it was terrible.
Oh,
That is something, right? But that's obviously not what you're trying to measure. You're hopefully not just measuring that we were not terrible.
yeah, which is fine. I mean, like you could measure how good or terrible something is. But I think like to go to a strategic level and say we're going to deliver an induction onboarding program that's going to change attrition for this organization that had like 30,000 people in the UK, and you're like, unless you're hiring 30,000 people a year, like I don't really see how you're going to have a measurable outcome. And also, again, the spacing, right, is that what you need to do for me is get down to a granular level. Who attended the training and how long did they stay for? And that's what you want to measure. Again, but that's a real slow burn. And ultimately, that metric should be already baked into the organization already. It shouldn't be that we go, oh, we need to start doing this. It's like, no, you should know on a daily basis how many people you have in an organization, when they started, when they left, and all that kind of stuff.
So I think attrition is a really interesting one specifically, because I think it has quite a lot of blind spots. A lot of people talk about their attrition rate, but you don't necessarily distinguish what people are going on to do, because there is a big difference between, someone, and also why they're leaving, right? Because there's a big difference between someone leaving because they're retiring or they're choosing not to work anymore. There's a big difference between that and somebody leaving because they are miserable and they hate their job and they're going for a worse paid job at a competitor, or somebody who's got a promotion and is in a company where you're then going to be able to do perhaps work together in some way. Maybe they become a client of yours or you'll become a client of theirs, or there's some sort of collaboration because of this individual that you've nurtured and grown, which I know you hate that language, but like you've helped to develop. And so they've gone on to flourish and spread their wings elsewhere. So all of these things go to show that there are blind spots when we collect data, and the figures themselves don't necessarily show exactly what's happening. They can make us think sometimes that we're more informed than we are because we're missing that context.
And I think you're right, right? So the biggest blind spot it uncovers is that once someone leaves, you cut the ties, and it's like that's not really good enough because you are missing out on a wealth of information. Regardless if you do an offboarding interview or not, that's just one thing you can do, and that's not the.
But don't knock an offboarding interview.
I'm not going to
okay? If you're doing an offboarding interview, you're already ahead of an awful lot of other people who are just basically saying, done. Or if you look at like the States, where you're literally marched from your desk and like you're never allowed to see anybody again.
There are a lot of great HR and people teams there that have a really great form for holding offboarding interviews that don't get used. So I'm not knocking it. There's definitely some forms out there that exist to enable that to happen.
And I know I'm just bringing point after point after point, and in the last 30 seconds of this 5 minutes, but yeah, doing what you're doing with the data, that's the other major thing. Okay, collect the data, but then please do something with it.
And I think that's where we get to, right? You've got to be able to look at these blind spots and interrogate them. We've just got to be able to interrogate the data you're currently capturing with some level of like brutal honesty and go, are we really expecting the things we say and do and create to move this metric, or are we just measuring it because HR has measured it for time? And what could we be measuring as a result? And
And what are
Technology.
we going to do with the information that we're getting from that measurement? How is that going to change our behavior?
Exactly. And the most annoying thing is that technology, rightly or wrongly, should be giving you a wealth of information more than you were 10 years ago, certainly more than you were 15 or 20 years ago. Like there's more information out there about what people are doing, they're saying, they're thinking, they're feeling. And to tell it in individual, like pulse, let's go on. Let's just finish on for the last 5 minutes.
Toby's favorite.
Okay, my favorite. Pulse surveys. Annual, regardless of how frequently you do them, annual, quarterly, I'm not allowed to say biannual, am I? Every 6 months. It's capturing information that sits in a silo. Very rarely have I seen a pulse survey that is then correlated with any other metrics other than itself and movement against itself. And you're like, like someone's told me something, and I'm not going to try and link it to anything else. And lo and behold, no one acts on anything that's in a pulse survey because it's like, well, I don't really see how this is linked to business performance, so I'm not going to change it. Same with Glassdoor, right? Oh, it's just disgruntled employee, blah, 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 blah. No, that actually has a significant impact on your company's performance. But what you're not able to do is link those two things together, so you end up just kind of disregarding it. And it's like, winds me up no end, as you can probably tell. Go on, Emily, what's the thing that winds you up most about data? And then we'll get out of here and talk about something else next week.
Oh, you needed to prime me for this question. Now I'm panicking for an answer. The thing that winds me up the most. Okay, the thing that winds me up the most is when you have an initiative and people have planned it, and then you ask a question, how are you measuring this? And they go, oh, we haven't thought about that. That, to be honest, is the thing that winds me up the most, because whenever you're doing anything and you're putting anything in place, you need to be thinking about how you're going to know if it's a success or not. Otherwise, how will you know whether you should do it again or do something differently? Like, you just won't know, and it's just operating blind. Oh, but my gut said this.
Sorry, I've just had a notification. I know, and yes, because otherwise the answer there is like, what metrics do we have already that we can tie it to? Not like what can we get and what could we measure. It's like we'll just go and find what we're already measuring and what already exists, which is where you get to attrition as the answer all the time, because it's like, it's the one metric that you can just pull off the shelf and go, we'll measure against that. Hacking HR, my favorite LinkedIn page, which has 890,000 followers, so people are paying attention to this stuff. Why strategic recognition delivers exceptional ROI, and just the headlines, it does feel like they're pulling numbers from nowhere. You get 2.7 times higher engagement. You get minus.
I know exactly where they're putting those numbers from.
Yeah,
Scallop's engagement statistics.
I wish HR teams or people in HR would start pulling stuff from Gallup and kind of go, oh, well, this applies to our company. It's like, you actually have the information and data in your company to measure this yourself. You don't need to be looking at market trends that try and generalize every single company.
Across the entire world.
Just measure it. It's there. You can do it. Minus 43% turnover. Hang on. Is this a double negative? Minus 43% reduced turnover. Is that a double negative?
It's just clunky English. I think we all know what they're trying to say.
I think we all know what hacking HR are trying to say, and they're trying to say the same old bullshit that they keep peddling out, which is the same thing HR's been talking about for 15 years. But hey, I can slag off hacking HR.
No, you can't. Don't be rude.
No, I got taken down quite swiftly by someone in the comments in hacking HR about a year ago. It was my best performing post last year. I'll dig that old cherry up because that was fun. 67% more motivation.
Obviously. Don't you feel more motivated?
22% improved well-being. Stronger cultures. No measure with that one. Stronger cultures. And then there's a picture of a jigsaw puzzle and 23% greater profitability. Why do we keep accepting this? Why? I can't do it anymore.
No one's got any other numbers.
We have. And with that quite epic meltdown, I think we should probably get out of here before I shout down the microphone anymore. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We did a little bit earlier this week. Apologies if you usually expect us at 3 p.m. UK time. We did have to do a little bit earlier because of scheduling conflicts with client work. as you can imagine. As Emily said right at the top, we're very busy. So thank you for those who joined us on adjusted time, and for those listening or watching and catch up, we appreciate you too. Emily, let's get out of here. Do a wave and say goodbye.
Bye.